to position it as benefit for consumers in a sense that their price will not increase, which could have increased. How do you look at this and how do you explain this?
We don't know what the game plan of the government is. If the game plan of the government is not to pass this benefit on to the consumer, then it practically has no impact on the consumer.
In 2014, the central excise collection of the central government was around 9 rupees to a litre, right? And that in 2020 and 2020 onwards has increased to 33 rupees to a litre.
Please understand that oil and LNG both are inputs into the manufacture of fertilizer, and we also import fertilizer. We import urea from the Gulf area. The public sector is a major supplier, and many of the pumps themselves are public sector. The point is, it's the easiest way of the government imposing a tax, and tomorrow you have benefits.
Hello and welcome. You're watching me, Sanket Upadhyay, on TheFederal. The show is called AI with Sanket. This is the AI of news, where news in India today requires not artificial but analytical intelligence. Because of the Iran-America war, the Strait of Hormuz situation, India is in the midst of a crisis. The crisis of crude oil imports, the crisis of LPG, and all of that has been widely reported. Particularly for petrol and diesel, we knew that this day would come that perhaps the prices will increase. The government has been trying to put this situation away so that this hard decision is not taken. There was one other alternative that the government had. You see, in good times, when the crude oil rates were less, the government would charge a very high and significant central excise tax, which is much more than double, almost triple, more than triple actually, of what it was in the year 2014, the UPA government. And now when the crisis happened, the government has reduced its central excise burden and offered that benefit to the oil marketing companies, which essentially means that your petrol and diesel price may not have increased on the pump. However, the government's direct central excise tax has reduced. That is being positioned as a big win. There is a very natural follow-up question to this. So if in the good times, when the crude oil rates were less, why did the government continue to charge excessive central excise tax? It could have reduced the tax and offered petrol and diesel to us, the consumers, at a much lesser rate. So is this really the masterstroke that it is being presented to be? That is the key question on this discussion. Let's discuss. Joining us right now is noted economist Professor Santosh Mehrotra. Thank you very much, Professor Mehrotra. The government has positioned the reduction in the central excise and a massive reduction in the central excise as a bonanza and a relief for the consumers. Now, if you look at it in a certain way, yes, the benefit has been passed on to oil marketing companies reeling under the Iran-America war and feeling the brunt. But to position it as benefit for consumers in a sense that their price will not increase, which could have increased, how do you look at this and how do you explain this?
This may appear confusing, but the fact of the matter is this is simply transferring money from one hand into the next, because obviously the companies are all owned by the government, right? They are all owned by the government. So it's essentially an effort to make their profitability not look as bad as it otherwise might have been on account of the increase in international oil prices, because this government has had for the last 10 years a very significant, and its oil companies obviously have had a very significant windfall gain since 2015, when international oil prices collapsed from their over $100 a barrel price to roughly in the region of $60. And give or take a few dollars, it has gone up and down. It had peaked briefly in 2012, 22, sorry, when the Ukraine war broke out. But otherwise, after that, the international prices until 27th of February were at in the region of $60 per barrel. Now they're in the region of $110 a barrel, and gas has gone up as well. And LNG has also gone, meaning LPG has gone up, LNG has gone up, and we import very significant quantities. So essentially, all that is happening is that the government's own fiscal deficit for the period that this transfer is to occur is going to increase. But we don't know what the game plan of the government is. If the game plan of the government is not to pass this benefit on to the consumer, then it practically has no impact on the consumer. So, all that is happening is that perhaps the government's feeling that, the oil companies have had a very good run. We as a country have had a very good run, and we don't want the international standing of the oil companies to take a beating, so their stock prices don't drop, because they are a big player on the stock market. So their profitability doesn't drop, and so money is just getting transferred from the Ministry of Finance to the companies. So honestly, there's not that much to be explained here. This is simply an intra-governmental transfer that's taking place, and not too much for us to either worry about or even to overly analyze.
I agree to the point where you're saying that there is not enough to overly analyze an intra-governmental transfer. Instead of one tax, the oil marketing company is going to get the benefit. But here is the thing, Professor Mehrotra. In 2014, the central excise collection of the central government was around 9 rupees to a litre, right? And that in 2020 and 2020 onwards has increased to 33 rupees to a litre. In fact, if you look at the total taxation on petrol, state, VAT and central excise included, it is actually more than the actual cost of petrol. Now this, see, my question to you, Professor Mehrotra, is burden versus benefit. So if I were to say that today I'm not passing the burden to the consumers and their petrol will remain at the same price, then why were these consumers bereft of any benefit earlier when the crude oil price was less? That is the question.
A good question, certainly good question. The government could have passed on the benefits of the sustained, as I was saying to you, sustained windfall gain that both oil companies as well as the government of India has benefited from for decades. And it is, I can say this from a macroeconomic perspective, one of the very important reasons why the government of India in 2019 was able to carry out a corporate income tax cut from 30% to 25%, losing about 1.5 trillion rupees. Thereafter, just over a year ago in the budget of 26, FY26, FY26 onwards, they cut the CIT, the PIT, the personal income tax rate, so that, an income of 1 lakh rupees on personal income per month was exempt from taxation. I mean, this was a complete outrage. It is way above the per capita income. So what I'm trying to say is that the government is essentially has been benefiting, and it says, okay, our fiscal deficit is doing okay. The government's own revenues and taxes are fine. So we have enough leeway just now, because they've cut expenditures on a whole series of things in this budget. Sanket, look at Jal Jeevan Mission. They cut 50,000 crores. they know now that Manrega is going to cost them very little after the VB Gramji bill. Huh? Things like this. They're not increasing expenditure on health or on education. So the point is that the government feels reasonably comfortable to transfer these funds. And honestly, it may well be that the judgment here is that we are in a situation where this war is what is causing this problem, and therefore since we believe that the war is not going to carry on for too long, this is going to be fairly temporary. That means it's highly likely that by the end of April the war might be over. The government might be wrong about that. We don't know. No one knows. So you can see that there is a certain judgment call that the Ministry of Finance is making. And honestly, if I was in the government, I'll tell you what I would do under the current circumstances, because please understand that oil and LNG both are inputs into the manufacture of fertilizer, and we also import fertilizer. We import urea from the Gulf area. Now, there is a total fiscal burden of fertilizer subsidy in our current budget, meaning FY27 budget announced on the 1st of Feb, of, believe it or not, 1.8 trillion rupees, 1.858 trillion lakh crores. And this has been rising constantly. Now, this is an extremely high number, and this is bad because some 80% of this, Sanket, is accounted for by urea. Which is partly imported and partly made domestically. Now, urea, because of the subsidy, the price to the farmer is very low, Sanket. Okay? Your viewers must have to understand this. The price in the market for the farmer is extremely low. So, as compared to the other two types of fertilizer that have to go in, which are phosphatic and potash. Now, this is not nitrogenous, the urea one. Point is that agri-scientists tell us that the ratio of application on a crop of land should be, for a crop, should be 4:2:1 of nitrogen to potash to phosphorus. Now, because nitrogen is 4, but it is cheap, the subsidy on that is much higher than the subsidy on the other two. So what do farmers do? They apply too much for urea. That is harming the crop. It is harming the yields. It is harming the soil. This is an outrageous situation. So I began this intervention by saying, what would I have done? I would have actually saved by cutting the fertilizer subsidy. So in other words, the government would have saved money, and thereby it wouldn't have to transfer so much through the Fertilizer Corporation of India to the various fertilizer companies, because which operate with both in the private sector as well as the public sector. It's an outrageous situation where we are funding excessive use, which is reducing yields and drawing down the soil fertility. So, I would have done that. That's not being done. What the government is doing is honestly not particularly sensible.
Professor Mehrotra, my last question. In the past also, we have seen that the government, in order to cushion the oil marketing companies, whenever crude oil prices go up, it tends to reduce its tax. And when the crude oil rates normalize or reduce, the government reimposes that tax burden. In effect, trying to tell the consumer, you see, you are not impacted. Your rate remains the same. We have spoken about benefit versus burden. Now, my question is, we had the fortune of speaking, when the last time something like this happened, to the former finance minister, P. Chidambaram. And he said that this form of taxation itself, where you impose extremely heavy central excise tax on petrol and diesel is a form of lazy taxation. I want to know your views. What do you think?
Yes, of course, it is. You see, I'll explain to you why Mr. Chidambaram would have said that. See, with any other form of indirect tax, there are all kinds of ways of the seller, meaning, let's say, in this case, the petrol pump is the seller. Now, in all other cases than in petrol and diesel and so on, there is a potential for under invoicing or understating how much was actually sold, so that you have less tax to report. In this case, you see, it's a pump and the pump meter runs. So outflow of petrol, diesel, gas is measured. And since the public sector is a major supplier and many of the pumps themselves are public sector, the point is, it's the easiest way of the government imposing a tax, and tomorrow you have benefits. Because, look, you increase the price of petrol or diesel, it's an inelastic demand. People are not going to suddenly cut their trips, especially if, the commercial ones. So therefore, it's easy, simple, and the money comes into the treasury very quickly, and that's why it's lazy taxation.
I get it. Thank you very much, Professor Mehrotra, for putting things in perspective. You feel that this is just an intra-government transfer, while the consumer is not being burdened because of this situation, he is not benefiting either. So that thing has to be put in perspective. And if no burden or less burden is being positioned as benefit, then that is politics for you. Then we won't get into the economics of it. Thank you very much, Professor Mehrotra, for joining us.